Now we're going to practice telling the difference between an observational study and an experiment. So what we're going to try to do is determine what type it is. Sample frame, we might be talking about subjects if it's an experiment instead of a sample frame. Response variables, which we can have for both. Sources of bias, and for experiments also provide the levels of factor in any controls used. So in this first one, you'll notice these are actually pretty recent articles from The Week, one of my favorite magazines. A health scare of the week: less sleep, bigger belly. People who don't get enough sleep could be adding inches to their waistline, a new study has shown. Researchers at the University of Leeds in the UK examined the association between sleep, diet, weight, and overall metabolic health among more than 1,600 adults who tracked their diet and how long they slept each night. The researchers measured each person's waist circumference, factored in variables including age, ethnicity, smoking, and income, and checked the participants' blood pressure, blood cholesterol, blood sugar, and thyroid function. They found that the waistlines of those who slept an average of 6 hours each night were about 1.2 inches larger than the waistline of those who managed 9 hours. The participants who slept less also had lower levels of HDL, the good cholesterol that helps reduce the risk for heart disease. The importance of sleep should not be underestimated, researcher Laura Hardy added. The current consensus is that 7 to 9 hours is the best for most adults. So this is an observational study, and because we're looking at people who tracked it. We did not assign a treatment to them. We did not say, oh, you're going to sleep this much, or you're going to eat this much, or this type of diet. We just basically tracked them. So that's a key hallmark of an observational study. This one is prospective because they actually recruited them and then they tracked them. Our sample frame is UK adults, and our sample is 1,600 adults. Our response variables is basically how big the waistline is, and the explanatory variable is the hours of sleep. Now, it's kind of hard to see bias in here. First of all, this is an article, and they're trying to tell us results, so it's sometimes harder to pick out sources of bias. But we do know that this is not an experiment, so we cannot determine causation. Notice how they said could be adding. They said they could, and here they said an association. Right here, they did not say causation. So there's an association between the two, and that's because this is a study. You know, another thing you could think about that might be a bias here, there could be a distinct difference between people who get more sleep and people who get less. Maybe people who get more sleep have time to exercise, and people who get less may not. So it's much harder to establish causation here. Here's another health scare of the week: midlife weight gain. Americans tend to gain a pound or two each year between early adulthood and middle age. That gradual weight gain may not seem to be a cause for concern, but Harvard scientists warn that the extra pounds add up and significantly increase the risk for chronic health issues and early death. The researchers analyzed the health records of about 118,000 people. Women gained an average of 22 pounds between the ages of 18 and 55, while men packed on an average of 19 pounds. The study found that the gain of 5 pounds was a threshold for health problems. For every 11 pounds a person gained, the risk for type 2 diabetes rose by 30%, for high blood pressure by 14%, and for cancer by 6%. Study author Frank Hu tells medicaldaily.com that even a modest amount of weight gain may have important health consequences. So what was this? This is actually an observational study again, because they went back and they looked at health records. So this is a retrospective study. It's not like they were tracking. They were going back and looking back in time. The sample frame was Americans between the ages of 18 and 55, and their sample included health records of 118,000 Americans. The explanatory variable is the weight gain from ages 18 to 55, and what they were measuring was the risk for chronic health issues and early death. So if we look here, some of this was, they said 30% for type 2 diabetes, 14% for high blood pressure, 6% for cancer. All of those are different response variables. Now, what could be a source of bias? Well, first of all, let me say this is an observational study, so no causation can be determined. So that's not really a source of bias, but we should go ahead and put that out there. We also don't know what is the source for the health records. Maybe there's something with this group of people, but we're not sure. Now, here's another issue. Maybe people with chronic health issues are more likely to gain weight. Think about it. If they're not able to work out, it's harder to keep the weight off. So it's kind of hard to tell. Again, another reason we really can't determine causation. Last but not least, generosity breeds contentment. By definition, selflessness, like virtue, is its own reward, but new research reveals that altruism, that's like generosity, offers some personal perks as well. Even a mere pledge to help others can trigger changes in the brain that produce a warm glow of happiness and contentment, an international team of psychologists found. The researchers told 50 people that they would be given $100 over the course of 4 weeks. Half were instructed to keep the money for themselves. The remaining subjects were asked to spend the money on other people and describe how they would use it. Next, the participants' brains were scanned as they considered various giving scenarios, which pitted their own interest against recipients of their generosity. The brain images revealed that selfless acts of giving triggered increased activity and connectivity in the temporoparietal junction and the ventral striatum, regions associated with reward, pleasure, and happiness. Even small acts of generosity had significant effects. You don't need to become a self-sacrificing martyr to feel happier. University of Zurich researcher Philippe Tobler tells PsychCentral.com, just being a little more generous will suffice. So, what is this? This is actually an experiment, and there were 50 subjects. It's if it was not people, it would be experimental units, but here we're dealing with subjects. The levels of the factor. Both groups got $100, but one kept the money, sort of our control group, and the others spent it on other people and described how it was used. The response variable, as they said, is the activity in the reward centers of the brain. And the explanatory variable was, were they being generous or not? So sources of bias, well, we presume the subjects were randomly assigned to the two groups to minimize bias. So you'll notice that he's saying being more generous will suffice. He's actually going for causation here because it is an experiment.